Thank you. My favorite author today is a gentleman called Yuval Noah Harari. I don't know if any of you have read this wonderful book he wrote called Sapiens. And Sapiens for me is the Bible of the past, as he writes. And his new book called Homo Deus is actually what he writes as the history of the future. And the reason I'm saying this is two very important points that Professor Harari makes. One is, of course, the fact that man will continue his search for immortality. Because we all, for some strange reason that nobody knows, want to live forever. And he says that is probably something we will acquire. I mean, maybe we will wander around with artificial limbs and artificial parts, but we'll still be there in whatever context you expect to be there. He also says that man will continue in this completely impossible quest for happiness, which of course, Ravi, you rightly said, is possible if you read your book, and I think that's one answer to Mr. Harari. But the important point he makes is, which is very important for many of you young people in this room, that we have to be very conscious of the fact that we will have to keep learning new things in our lives. Because if you end up living 100, 120 years, there is no way what you learned in COEP, brilliant though it may be, is going to last you forever. So you've got to keep revisiting yourself. And when I look back on my own life, I started off as a mechanical engineer, industrial engineering, spent 5 years in manufacturing, got an opportunity to set up my own company, so moved into software very, very early in my life. Decided it was too early to be an entrepreneur, maybe my mistake. Went into the training company, NIIT. So I ran a company called Aptech for 10 years. And after that, ran a company called Zensar right here in the city for 15 years. And today I'm having real fun. I was telling Ravi that doing a whole bunch of stuff, which I'll maybe speak a little bit about as we go on. Do we have a timer in this room, or do I have to keep looking at my watch? No, you don't have a timer? I'll make sure. Or somebody can wave to me when you say, look, shut up and get down. It'll be nice. 1 minute before you want to do that. The reason I'm saying this is that this journey is what many of us will go through. My own journey has been phenomenal because I set out with no expectations from my life. And everything good that happened to me, and which kind of gets reflected in the books I wrote, is the joy of just experiencing something completely new. I remember I wrote my first book when I was running this company, Aptech, and that was along with a very senior colleague called M.S. Jayaraman. And he and I were fascinated with this concept called business process re-engineering in those days. So we both went to America, met a guru called Michael Hammer and James Champy, and we actually looked at how from an Indian context we can apply business process re-engineering, and even today a lot of my consulting is in that area. So we wrote one book. A lot of our CEO friends said that, look, why don't you write another book on the kind of how to do it kind of books. So we wrote a book on how to do business process re-engineering, both published by McGraw-Hill. Somewhere down the line, I joined Zensar, and my interest changed to this whole area, which, as Aruna alluded to, knowledge, wisdom, data, information, and we started researching knowledge management. And the first book I wrote, which is even today a textbook in all the IITs on knowledge management, was exactly what is knowledge management and how does it apply to the generations of today and tomorrow. We then wrote another book, which my wife and I wrote when we were living in London, which was on knowledge management as applied to large corporations and knowledge management as applied to startups, and what are the similarities. I mean, the whole concept of entrepreneurial, that how can large company CEOs behave like startup entrepreneurs and build truly knowledge-filled companies. After that, I think I got a little older, so I didn't write any more complicated books. So I wrote 3 successive books on motivating millennials. Because even then, even more so now, we realized that the Gen X's in those days, the millennials, today everybody is a millennial. Okay? I'm a millennial at heart if I'm not in age. So all of us think like millennials. Okay? So now everybody's talking about Gen Zs. What's a Gen Z? A Gen Z is a 22-year-old, many of you in this room, who think the 25-year-olds are ancient. Okay, even today when people say that, look, I meet a friend of mine who is 60 years old and say, I'm mentoring these young kids. I said, I hope those kids want to get mentored by you. Because you kids, and you're all smiling, want to get mentored by somebody who's been there, done that 3 years before. And not somebody who's been there, done that 40 years before, and who says, when I was your age, I used to behave like this. I've had young people who say, who cares what you were doing when you were my age? It's a different world. So I think that is the audience I was appealing to. And I was privileged, and my colleague who wrote the book I'm going to talk about, we wrote a book about Zensar. Okay, it is actually titled Startup to Global Success. And for the first time in my life, I moved away from McGraw-Hill, and we actually wrote it with Sage because they wanted to be an academic kind of publication. And the good part of that book was that it wasn't preachy. It was just talking about everyday life, everyday people, the people who made Zensar happen. I've been fortunate to have had outstanding teams throughout my life. In Aptech, when I first joined Aptech in 1991, we were a little company, 4 crores in revenue and 10 crores in losses, if such a thing is possible. Business schools, they teach you that there is always something called EBITDA, and we had a negative EBITDA which was higher than our revenues. But we took it from there. We didn't know what could go wrong or what could go right. When I left Aptech in 2001, we were 1,400 training centers in 42 countries, market leadership in China and many other places. We didn't know what couldn't be done. So we climbed every mountain we could. And I will come back to why I'm saying that, because it's the theme of our book. And then I moved to Zensar, very similar. I mean, if any of you were in Pune in 2001, Zensar was a little 40 crore company that did not deserve to exist. I mean, who ran 40 crore companies in 2001 when you had TCS and Infosys and everything else? But again, I had a team led by Pramila, who's right here in this room. Pramila had just joined as a young person coming in from Hyderabad with a young child. And again, somebody who could never say no to anything. And we said, let's create what I had done very successfully in Aptech called, let's create a vision community. Now, what's a vision community? It's a community which has no hierarchies. It doesn't matter whether you're a senior vice president or a junior graduate trainee, but it is a community that cares for the future. So I remember we constituted the first vision community in 2001, and we never looked back. When I left Zensar in 2016, we were a 4,000 crore company, 8,300 employees. Our market capitalization, because that's what the stock markets look at, from 2010 to 2015 had gone 44% per year, it had gone higher. Good news for me, because I joined the company and got shares at valuation of 17. When I left, it was 950. So it always helps when you're part of a success story, which also gives you some money back. It's not a bad idea. So then we wrote this book. Literally in the last 3 months of my tenure in Zensar, Pramila and I got together and said, let's write it before we forget what made it happen. Because you never know the future. You never know that, look, maybe 20 years from now or 5 years from now, what will happen to the industry. So we said, let's write this story. And we started thinking about this whole concept of leadership. And this was, the classic definition of leadership is, the leadership is this great guru who stands on the pulpit and preaches to the masses, and like Moses comes down with 2 tablets and leads everybody to the promised land. Complete bullshit. Sorry to use French language in COEP, but nobody cares for such leaders anymore. Who cares for leaders who stand up on the pulpit and tell us how to behave? So we found very clearly, and I think if there is any success we got in Aptech and then Zensar, everybody is equal. As I said, everybody is part of a vision community. Everybody has to work together to make it happen. So I just thought I'd share with you some things we learned in the next 3-4 minutes on how young leaders can be motivated, and it's all there in the book. In fact, the book is of course on multiple strands of innovation, growth, managing markets, managing customers, etc. But here I thought I'll just talk about what we learned about how people get motivated and how we can really make this happen. Now I have a timer which is contrary to my watch, which says I have 10 minutes and 35 seconds, right? The organizers will tell me whether this is right or my 6-minute estimate is right. Is okay? Fine. I get 4 more minutes, that's fine. Never say no to me, additional time. So we came up with one very simple phenomenon. And this is coming from the IT industry. I remember meeting a young friend who was running a business process outsourcing unit. And I asked him this question, normal question, what's your attrition in Bangalore like? You know what attrition is, number of people who leave during the year. So I thought he'll say it's very high in Bangalore, it's 40% or something like that. He told me it's 146% in my company. Now if you calculate, ladies and gentlemen, 146% means that every 10.5 months you have a new company altogether. Seriously, that's the math. And I said, my God. And when I turned around in Aptech, in Zensar, our attrition was as high as 18%. And we were worried about that. But the Bangalore guy gave me a lot of confidence that we were doing right. So I remember Pramila and I sat together and said, how do we ensure that the attrition, people leaving the company, comes down to less than 10%, which would have been historic, but nobody had done it before. We also said, which is more important, that if you look at critical talent, the 10% of the company who really makes things happen, that time we were 2,400 people. He said, how do we identify these 240 people and ensure there the attrition comes down to less than 2%? Now this was a humongous task we set for ourselves. But we said everything we do, which is again, as I mentioned in the book, will be towards making these things happen. So we came up with this very simple formula, which is still, I'm sure, there in Zensar today. It's let's find better ways of attracting people. Let's find better ways of enabling them to succeed and be true leaders in their own right. And last but not the least, let's retain. Let's make sure the good people don't leave. So I think that was the whole premise of what we set out to do. And we did quite a few things, and I'm putting it in kind of French over there so that you don't try to read before I talk about it. The first thing was hiring right. See, we used to, even then, we had 400 applications for every person we would hire. Because we said if you hire one person, not with the wrong skills, but with the wrong attitude, you are likely to be that will be the bad apple in the large basket. So we were like extremely super conscious about hiring and making sure that we got it absolutely right. So we would still not, we didn't have this thing saying we'll only hire from IIM Ahmedabad. Sorry, Jen. I mean, we did hire from IIM Ahmedabad, but he said whether it's ISB or COEP or PICT or Indira Institute of Management right here in Pune, we will look for people with aptitude, and it doesn't matter which business school they come from. So that was one thing. The second was what we said O2J. Now O2J is a jargon we use in the IT industry, which is the offer to joining ratio. You'll be horrified to know that today, from the time you make an offer to the number of people who actually join after accepting your signed offer is less than 40%, which means there's a 60% offer to joining attrition. Why do people do this? E-commerce helps us, because the minute you resign from your existing company, all you have to do is go and post your biodata on resume.com, because they will then know that you have a smaller notice period, you already resigned, and get you 5 other jobs. Very sad, very unethical, but that's the nature of the beast. And we said our O2J must be at least 95%, which means that out of 100 people we make offers, only 5 shouldn't join, and they should have very good reasons. So, and we systematically went out to make this happen, and that's mentioned in how we did it in the book. Boomerang recruitment, again very counterintuitive, because a lot of us believe that, look, if a guy has actually left my organization, he must be a villain and we'll never hire him again. We had a welcome back policy. In fact, the person who became one of our most successful leaders, a gentleman called Nitin Param, who runs today a $1.2 billion business for Wipro, he left, ran his own company, didn't enjoy what he was doing, and came right back. And we found boomerangs to be extremely useful as well, and said, look, if we take a person back for the second time, he's going to stay there for life. First, he's grateful that the company took him back, and second, he's got that experience, which is invaluable for us. So we found that to be very good. So that was the attract part. If you look at the enable part, vision communities was clearly one. I remember when vision communities were very successful, one of my professors from Harvard, Professor David Garvin came to Pune for a lecture in NASSCOM, and he asked me that, look, I mean, you've grown from 2,000 people to 6,000 people in 2 years' time. What's the secret? And I told him, David, Professor David Garvin, I said, David, it's all about love. He said, are you sure? Love? Do you really want to use that word? I said, yeah, we love our people love us. I mean, Zensar for us is a religion. It's not like a company we go to and work 5 days a week. So he said, can I do a case study on this? Now, this was getting into troubled waters. I said, sure. And Garvin being Garvin, within 3 weeks, we had a whole team of 4 researchers from Harvard Business School who landed up and spent 3 months on our campus. Fortunately, I think we got all the right people to meet them. So they wrote one of the most flattering cases I've ever seen in the history. In fact, it's still taught in multiple business schools, including IIM and Bangalore. But he went into the genesis of what made this culture work. And vision communities is what's on the surface. In fact, Harvard Business Review then wrote an article on the next one called ARs, Associate Relations. We said we can't have HR managers who preach from the pulpit and say, this is what you should do, you should come on time, etc., etc. HR should be associate relations. Now, every bunch of 100 associates or employees in the organization had one person they could go to for anything. I'm not getting this on time, please help me this, and you could never say no to any request. And this AR function became one of the most successful in Zensar in those days. Pramila, of course, started a wonderful initiative called Women for Excellence, which was so successful. There was a time when Zensar's, in fact, when I started, Zensar had 1 woman out of 13 people as senior management. When I left, out of 21 people in senior management, 14 were women. So this initiative was so strong that many of the young men came to me and said, please, can we now start ME, which is Men for Excellence? Because all the men were feeling left out. So this one and what we call our diversity and inclusion in initiatives were absolutely fabulous. Because I think this kind of brought people from 17 nationalities into the company. It brought people from all kinds of genders and everything else. So I think that is a real success. And finally, of course, we actually went out and trained 400 managers, which I think we mentioned in the book, on something called critical conversations or crucial conversations. And we found that in India, most managers are terrible at three things. One is they don't build a development action plan for their colleagues. They almost believe that you got to find your own way to the top. The second is they're very, very bad in giving feedbacks. Okay, we all think that there is an appraisal time, 6-month appraisal, annual appraisal, which is when we should be giving feedbacks. The reality is feedback should be continuous. You like a person, tell him you did a great job. You don't like what he did, tell him that. So I think that's something that was a critical conversation, be embedded in the culture. And the third, of course, is connectedness. So we spent a lot of time on connected leadership. And we got Mr. Arun Vaklu, who runs an entity called Pragati Learning right here in Pune. He kind of spent a couple of years with us, just understanding the culture that David Garvin had picked up so well. And he said, let's create a Jugnu initiative in Zensa. What is a Jugnu initiative? You know what a Jugnu is, right? It's a firefly. And every firefly lights up at its own time. You can't tell a Jugnu, now your light must come on. It doesn't work like that. So Jugnus light up. And what does that mean in an organization context? We said if fireflies rise, as my friend Arun Maira says, the fireflies rising will create a momentum in this world, in this country, in the organization. So we said, let's understand the fire in every Jugnu. So we actually set out to find, across 2,000 people, what is it that really rocks their boat? What is it that really makes them really, really motivated? And we try to align very systematically organization opportunities with the Jugnu in their soul. And we found that once you had the Jugnus matched, nothing would change them, nothing would make them leave. In fact, you'll be surprised, we had 27% of our employees out of an organization of 8,000 people engaged voluntarily in social responsibility. This initiative I'm very proud of in Pune called Pune City Connect, which I now chair, was actually incubated within Zensa in digital literacy, in skills, etc. And then we kind of took it out into the whole city, which is today an extremely successful initiative. And that was because people were doing it about the joy in their soul and not because somebody gave them marks for doing corporate social responsibility. So just to conclude, and I'll just summarize this. For us, the triple bottom lines were extremely important. The organization, our shareholders, our board of directors, our managers, and every Zensarian or every associate in the organization believed that their goal was the three bottom lines of maximizing profit for the organization, naturally, maximizing people orientation, which is where connectedness came in, and maximizing value for the planet or environment, as Ravi and Dr. Marshall had put it. So what we went out to do was, let's build authentic people within the organization. Let's empower them completely so that there is no supervision when somebody is confident enough to make things happen, and social leadership. And just to conclude, in a sense, in the last 3 years in my own life, and in fact the new book I'm planning to write is again about motivating young people, because I think it's an art, it's not a science anymore. But we are finding increasingly that if you look at my own life, I do 1/3 of my life today is on authentic skill building, consulting in digital, consulting in re-engineering, etc. 1/3 is on empowering, which is we have invested today in 14 startups. All these startups are entities which want to do better work for India. Digital India is going to be $1 trillion economy much before the economy itself becomes $5 trillion. But that Digital India will contain people like these young entrepreneurs whom we are building and who we will take as Jugnus to make Digital India more successful. And finally, social leadership. I mean, the kind of work I do today is 40% of my time, but I think that really, really adds value to the country. So let me stop by saying that, look, this book is about that, my life is about that, and I hope some of you will commit yourself to making India more successful. Thank you very much.